I'm Elaine. So certainly I can't start talking without reviewing why is nutrition so important. And certainly the benefits of good nutrition are well known. You feel better, your quality of life is better when you've been well nourished. You're able to keep up your strength and your energy, maintaining your body's weight and your store of nutrients is important. When you're having treatment, a better nutritional status will help enhance your treatment and help you minimize any interruptions or delays completing treatment. Your risk of infection is lower if you're eating well, and as well you will heal and recover faster. So eating well isn't always easy when the cancer you have or the treatment you're getting is in the part of your body that you have to eat through. So it's important that for your body to function at its best, you really try and do the things that will promote good nutrition. Snacking often, eating frequent meals, making sure you get calories and protein at each meal or at a snack time. Paying attention to fluids. It's always important to be hydrated. And then quite often, especially in this group, you need to rely on some high-calorie, high-protein beverages, as fluids are usually the easiest thing to go down when you're dealing with this kind of cancer. The challenges to eat are great when cancer is in your mouth or your throat. Some of the challenges that you likely know about are things like taste impairment, that dry mouth that we call the gift that keeps on giving after radiation. It can go on for months and months or some years for some. Sore mouth. How do you eat when your mouth and your tongue are so sore? Difficulty swallowing, the feeling of food or the inability of food to get down. Painful swallowing, like trying to swallow when it hurts. We quite often have to use tube feedings to help achieve the goals that need to be achieved. But definitely it's dependent on the type of treatment you've had, the type of cancer you have, just an ongoing challenge for many. The strategies, though, for what to eat are many. Certainly, texture modification is one of the first things we talk about. You can't eat dry, rough, hard foods when you've got a really sore mouth. So making things softer, using more liquid. Sometimes you have to thicken the liquid so that they go down in a better fashion. Adding moisture to drier foods so they can go down easier. Gravies, sauces, having a liquid wash so that if you're eating a sandwich and you feel like it's sort of stuck in your throat, you take a gulp and wash it down. Dunking things, it's not just for Oreo cookies dunked in milk, but putting your bread in your soup and dunking it so you can swallow it easier. A lot of people really have sensitivity and irritations that prevent them from eating many types of foods, specifically acidic foods, spicy foods. If things aren't soft or minced, they can be quite difficult. Carbonation bothers many people, so if it's a very fizzy drink or that may be uncomfortable. And the temperature. Drinking a hot coffee or a hot soup when you've got a radiated or a sensitive mouth is hard to manage. So adjusting things makes it easier. Again, we rely a lot on fluids, and so they need to be high energy and high protein. Homemade versions or commercial, there's lots out there. And then just mindful eating. Once you've encountered this, some of these challenges, you can't be yapping away at your kids while trying to swallow a sandwich. You have to be thinking about how am I going to swallow this, or concentrating, or it may take longer. Thinking about where you're going to eat or what you're going to eat, it becomes more of an issue. But really, the bottom line is, what do you need to eat? You need to eat protein, you need to have fats, you need to have your carbohydrates, fluids, you need vitamins and minerals, antioxidants, and phytonutrients. So any meal plan that eliminates one or more of these main items won't be balanced. Edith's going to talk a bit more about that, I think. So protein, we talk about it all the time. There are some really important choices, and definitely meat, fish, and poultry are one of those top stars there. Nuts and seeds, nut butters are good choices for protein. Eggs are really good. Things like dried peas, beans, lentils are good sources of proteins. And then the milk and the milk products. A lot of people are drinking alternate milk now. So I had someone yesterday telling me how much he liked rice milk. Rice milk might taste good, but doesn't have very much protein. So you want the protein, you need cow milk or a soy product. Calories. How do you know how much you need? Well, you need enough to keep your weight. That's the bottom line. So checking your weight regularly will be a great way of figuring out if you're getting enough. Weight's going down too quickly, unintended, you're probably not eating enough. High-calorie foods that make it easier to put weight on. For many of us, those are things that you try and limit, but when you're going through treatment for head and neck cancer or surviving afterwards, you need to use more of these, like butters and oils, gravy, sauces, creams, sour cream, yogurt, ice cream. They're all really high-calorie. Nuts and seeds, and of course, a few sweets here and there. What about drinking? How do you know how much to drink? Most people realize they don't drink enough. Our rule of thumb, our sort of cheating way of figuring out, we calculate about 25 to 40 mils per kilogram of body weight. So for an average size woman, that might be 1,500 to 24, so 1.5 liters to 2.5. 6 to 10 cups, let's say. For an average size man, maybe 2 to 3.5 liters. If eating is really difficult, or if you're losing weight though, you need to focus on foods that have value rather than just water or clear tea or coffee. So fluids that are providing some calories and protein need to be factored in. So the types of things I'm talking about are fluids that have protein and calories. So soup, as I hear we have some delicious ones outside today. If it's made with milk, with legumes, with meat, or fish or chicken, you're going to get some good protein and calories. Any milk product pretty much is going to be a good choice for calories and protein. Soy milk, and then again, as I've mentioned, the smoothies and nutritional supplements. And then there's the type of fluids that do provide some calories, but really not much in the way of protein, and they play a role as well. So things like juices and Gatorade, popsicles, and then alcohol falls into that. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. May not be compatible though with your treatment or your medication. And then there's the whole category of fluids that are hydrating but aren't providing really any nutritional value. So things like water, clear coffee or tea, any of the sugar-free pop or drinks and such. So what about alcohol? Well, according to the Canadian Cancer Society, their word is men, the limit should be less than 2 drinks a day, and women less than 1. And it may not be recommended to consume alcohol during treatment or with certain medications, so you really want to check that out with your doctor or your pharmacist. And just to highlight what one drink does consist of, it would be 1 12-ounce beer, or an 8 or 9-ounce malt one, a 5-ounce glass of wine, or a 1.5-ounce shot of like vodka or whiskey or rum. So what about vitamins and minerals? We like to say in the nutrition business, eat the rainbow. The more colors, the more nutrients you're getting. So, you know, there's vibrant vegetables and fruits and grains that just offer a whole host of nutrients. You want to get a variety of nutrients from a wide range of foods. There is magic in food. You can't just take a supplement and rely on what it's providing. Whatever, you know, the secret ingredients within the green peppers and the purple eggplants are providing you with lots more than just that isolated nutrient that you would take in a pill. But the one supplement that is recommended, and the studies have been quite indicative of supplementing is for vitamin D, and especially for us in Canada where we're not getting sunshine all the time, the recommendations are 1,000 international units a day, particularly when the weather is like what we've been having now, not a lot of sunshine. I do want to make note, though, that supplementing with large doses of antioxidants, so that those are vitamins A, E, C, selenium, and zinc, or any vitamin-enhanced foods, isn't recommended during treatment, and that's quite consistent throughout cancer treatment in North America. So yeah, I've whipped through that pretty quickly, but I'm going to turn the mic over to Edith now, who's going to talk a little bit more about moving forward.
Good evening. Thanks, Elaine. So my job tonight is to sort of put the icing on the cake, so to speak. And a lot of people will go through treatment and they've heard from us about focusing on getting enough calories, getting enough protein, drinking enough fluids, and they want to know how they can, moving forward when they're feeling better, sort of dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of good nutrition. So Elaine has mentioned some of these already, and I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we've got some handouts available for you to pick up at the front of the room. And so this slide is mirrored in this mauve-colored handout, which highlights some of the strategies people can do to make their diet even better. So the first thing is, if you think through your intake yesterday, how many of us really have had 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables in an average day? So a serving is about a half a cup of a fruit or a vegetable or a piece of fruit like an apple or a banana. And so when you add up your intake over the course of days, most people are a little shy on that. So that's something that most of us can do, and I'll talk more about how to integrate these foods into our diet every day. Eating high fiber foods. So in Canada, we tend to not eat as many whole grain breads and cereals and skins on fruits and fruits with seeds throughout them, membranes like in an orange or a grapefruit. And so eating more high fiber foods is always something we can do to try to make our diets even better. Helps with bowel regularity and a whole host of other health issues. Elaine's talked about eating fats, and during treatment they're a wonderful way to add extra calories when eating is difficult. And certainly long-term foods help to lubricate foods and make them taste better. But we can pick more heart-healthy fats by choosing things like olive oil, canola oil, healthy margarines like Baicel over some more saturated fats. So just something to consider. If all things are equal, maybe a dosing of olive oil on vegetables is just as good as a pat of butter. Limiting alcohol we've talked about. In North America, we tend to focus our protein choices typically on animal foods, but there's a whole bunch of non-animal sources of protein that are really worth thinking about putting into your diet. So things like legumes, dried beans, peas, and lentils, nuts and seeds, and foods that are made from those legumes like soy products, tofu, soy milk, etc. So edamame, all good choices, and they have fiber going for them, and often they're really low cost. So those are foods, and I'll talk more about using them in your diet as well. Using less salt helps us with our blood pressure, and using less sugar I'll talk more about as well, but both are considered to be good things to try to think about when you're thinking about healthy eating. This is one that is not on the purple sheet, but that's an Edith throw-in, that I think that there have many years been lots of evidence about using live bacterial culture in our diet. Most yogurts would be a good example of something with live bacterial culture, but there are lots of other foods like kefir, so something to consider and try to incorporate daily if you can. Activity and maintaining healthy weight are both wonderful ways that we can help to maximize our state of health. So we wanted to use as an example soup tonight. So it actually is a really in food apparently, and it's something that's pretty cozy and universally sought on a cold, blustery October evening. So when we think about soups, and having taken diet histories from patients over the years, I know that typically the go-to soup for a lot of people is chicken noodle soup from a can. So when I said soup, I'm wondering how many people thought of chicken noodle soup, Campbell's, or Lipton's. So that tends to be something that's an easy food, quick to prepare, but I'd challenge you to think about a soup like this. So this lentil soup, when we're thinking back to the slide that I just had up, it crosses off a lot of the things off the list in terms of a food that has more going for it than most soups you can buy in the grocery store. Admittedly, I made this soup last week. It took me probably 7 minutes to chop the vegetables, and I did an added step of sautéing the vegetables first before adding the broth, but this recipe doesn't call for that. They can just pop into the pot, add the broth, add some lentils, which are adding protein and fiber. And so the whole thing, in the time it takes to watch the news or walk the dog or do some other happy activity, you've got dinner made that's got several food groups represented, not any fat if this wasn't sautéed, but I used olive oil to sauté the vegetables. The addition of herbs and spices have the same kinds of benefits that fruits and vegetables have in them. So the more you can add vegetables to a soup, but additionally some herbs and spices. So this recipe has thyme or marjoram, but I made one similar last night that had turmeric, cumin, and cinnamon. And there's tons of studies out there that talk about the benefits of both herbs and spices of a variety of different types. So just because something hasn't been studied as of yet doesn't mean it doesn't have good, healthy phytonutrients that help us maximize our health. This soup blended beautifully and could even go through a strainer if you wanted it really silky smooth. So thinking back to my first example of a soup, the chicken noodle soup, if that's really something that you feel like having, there's nothing really wrong with it other than that we can't take out the high salt level that's in it. But what about adding some things to a soup? So the more we can think about the goals of nutrition, and if you're making something, let's say, I don't know, Kraft macaroni and cheese, for example, could that be ramped up a bit by adding a toss of kale or a few frozen peas or whatever? So it's if you think about each meal and each snack as an opportunity to add in a little more widely chosen breadth of nutrients, generally speaking, we can all make our diets a little bit better. So a soup could be a good vehicle for adding an egg whisked in and then it becomes egg drop soup, or opening up a can of some chickpeas and tossing them in, or some chopped tofu. A swirl of a bunch of different toppings that are available, like hummus, would be great to add some extra protein and fiber. The soup I made last night, which was a lentil soup, you swirled in some peanut butter, which again had the benefits of nuts in a smooth form. And adding some chopped chicken would add to the protein content of any soup, or dried milk powder, which works well in milk-based soups. With thinking about adding the nutrients from vegetables, frozen vegetables are actually a pretty great alternative to fresh, and they're handy and you don't need to chop them. So if you're rushing and want to add some vegetables to a canned soup, dump in some frozen vegetables and you'll have ramped up the variety that you're getting at that meal. Chopped greens, so there are so many different greens available, like Swiss chard and kale and spinach, and a little quick chop and into the soup they go, or into the pasta dish or into the stew. Great way to add some extra nutrients. And as I mentioned, snipping in fresh herbs into anything will add some flavor, but also some elements of these that are helpful for us, phytonutrients. So another example is this is sort of pretty typical of smoothies that you can buy in the grocery store. So they're pretty typically just juice and fruit blended together, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just lacks a few more elements of nutrition. So take, for example, if we start with the same base, but instead of juice, putting in some milk to add some protein, and that could be soy milk just as easily, some live bacterial culture coming from Greek yogurt, which tends to be higher in protein than the regular yogurt, and there's actually Icelandic yogurt, which even has more protein than Greek yogurt. So those are available in grocery stores. But then stirring in some protein powder, a nut butter, or tofu, and a nice little bunch of something green will broaden the nutrients of that smoothie and just make it have that much more variety. We had been asked to talk about some hot topics of nutrition. So these are things that people typically ask us about when they're in our offices. So I meant to point out too, this is the recipe that I had up on the screen earlier, and a cookbook which you might want to take a look at by Jean Lamantia, who's a registered dietitian who has written this book for people going through a cancer experience. So with regards to the hot topics, sugar and cancer is something that a lot of people question about. What is the relationship between sugar and cancer? And I've got a lime green sheet on this as well for some background reading. So there's really not a lot of nutritional benefit in a pop or candy, and it turns out that the sugar that we get from them, because it doesn't have any value connected with it, those foods are probably best used in moderation. So when we talk about sugar and cancer, there is a element of that every cell in our body uses sugar, but the foods that have a very great concentration of sugar and nothing else going for them are probably not ideal for us to use regularly. And we're not talking about the natural sugar that we get from eating a piece of fruit. Those foods are very valuable to us and good to have for health. But if you feel like having some sort of sweet treat, the key thing to try to do is to combine it with a protein food. And that action of combining a protein with sugars will help to slow down the rate they get into our bloodstream, and that we think is helpful. There's been a lot of controversy about soy. People have had a lot of questions that they've asked us about soy, and the bottom line now is that we think that soy is a really helpful thing to include, and there was a subgroup of patients with breast cancer, estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, that were particularly concerned about whether soy products would be good for them. But even with that group, having a serving of soy foods or more in a day is considered safe. Lots of people ask about should they be buying organic, and again, I've got a yellow sheet up at the front with a reference that you may find helpful. So important to note that in Canada things are a lot different than they are in the States. So if you're reading something that sounds scary and thinking, oh, you need to buy everything organic, know that in the States there are different standards for food safety than in Canada. So in Canada, milk and meat must be free of antibiotics and hormones by law. If you are wanting to shop for organic foods but finding them quite expensive, there are some foods that are more apt to have higher pesticide levels than others. So those might be the ones that you might want to spend your dollars on, and then the other foods just shop from the regular grocery store. And knowing too that all of the studies that have been done, and there are many, looking at the value of fruits and vegetables, these were typically done on just regular grocery store fruits and vegetables. So for example, I typically myself, and I'm in this field, don't shop for the organic because I'd rather buy a $2 cauliflower than a $6 cauliflower that looks a little wizened. So personal choice, but there is a guide that, and there's a reference for it on this yellow sheet that talks about the foods that produce that tends to be a little more apt to have pesticides residues. Those would be the dirty dozen, and the clean 15 are the foods in the produce section that typically don't have very much in terms of pesticides. So they might be, if you wanted to buy organic, might be the place to save your money and buy the regular. The alkaline diet has been something that was came up frequently when Elaine and I first started practicing as dietitians, and then it wasn't mentioned for years, but more recently some stars, some celebrities have been interested in it. Basically, there is nothing wrong and lots of great stuff with buying and eating lots of alkaline foods. So the theory is that we can, if we eat more alkaline foods, we can affect our body pH, our blood pH. The fact is you can't, but bottom line, include lots of alkaline foods, which are fruits, vegetables, and legumes, because they're great for us. So we won't change our blood pH, but we might just amp up the amount of nutrients we get in our diet. And we've included a list of references, which I now realize the slides aren't copied. So maybe I'll leave that up while I'm changing positions with the next speaker. And if you see something there, we've got booklets that are from the Canadian Cancer Society, which have, I think, most of these references. And you've got the Jean Lamantia reference, the last one mentioned on the handout with the lentil soup recipe. So with that, I will leave you for the next speaker.